Okay. So good morning, everybody, those of you in the sanctuary and those of you on Zoom. It is time for our summer book series. So we did this service about this time last year, and we shared some wonderful books with each other. I tend to do, I think, the most reading in the summertime. I love to sit on my porch and read, and something about the season just kind of sparks that youthful energy in me. I remember being an adolescent and just tearing through books in the summer. So we thought we'd do that again. One of the things that I wanted to say, kind of going back to what I was talking about this morning with topical sermons and, do we sort of pause everything as the world is falling apart to talk about the fact that the world is falling apart? And I don't always think that it is productive to stop everything we're doing and focus on the crisis only when there is a crisis. The world is burning all around us. And in order to withstand that kind of upheaval, we need to take care of ourselves. And one of the ways that we can take care of ourselves is by reading for pleasure, reading for knowledge, reading for liberation. So that's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to talk about books and things that feed our soul. I have a couple of books that I'm going to talk about, and then Mandy's got a couple of books that she's going to talk about. And then if you have a title that you want to share, we're going to start with the folks on Zoom. So raise your hand in that participants panel, and we'll call on you on Zoom. And if you're in the sanctuary and you have a title you want to share with us, come up to our living room book club, have a seat right here, and share the title with us. So the first book that I'm going to recommend is Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler. Oh, we're going to have a list of the books that are recommended this morning. That's our goal. So if you hear something and you think, oh, what was that book that Betsy mentioned? I really want to read that book. We'll have a list available. It'll go in the weekly update. So don't feel like you have to remember everything that's said this morning. You'll have access to the list. So the first book that I'm going to recommend is called Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler. It is the sequel to Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler that I recommended last summer. So one of the things that you've probably seen going around on social media are these memes and allusions to how all of a sudden we're living in The Handmaid's Tale. And it's mostly white women that are posting this meme about The Handmaid's Tale. And some of the criticism about that meme that's been floating around is that the thing about The Handmaid's Tale is that it's not fiction, right? Everything that happened in The Handmaid's Tale happened to women of color before Margaret Atwood wrote about it. It's just that in The Handmaid's Tale, it's happening to white women. Well, Octavia Butler was sort of the counterpoint to Margaret Atwood. She was a Black liberationist writer, and she wrote a lot of phenomenal post-apocalyptic fiction. And The Parable of the Sower and the sequel, The Parable of the Talents, is post-apocalyptic literature with an awareness of racial dynamics and rapid climate change and oligarchy. So The Parable of the Sower was written in the early 90s, and a lot of people say that she's prophetic because there is a politician in these books who uses the slogan, "Make America Great Again." Whoa, it's freaky. When she was writing way back in the 90s. I really, really, really recommend these books. I think they are phenomenal. I think Octavia Butler was a prophet before her time. But along with this book, I've got to issue a really strong trigger warning. There's a lot of violence in these books. There's a lot of gender-based violence, trigger warnings for sexual assault and other types of horrific things that make their way into the pages of these books. I took a whole year off between the parable of the sower and the parable of the talents. And then I read the parable of the talents in about 2 days. So strong trigger warning, but I do think they're worth it. I think they're pretty phenomenal books. The next book I want to recommend is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. Kat or Jess, have either of you read this? Okay, this book is adorable. This is a gay romance set in Brooklyn between a young woman who has just moved to Brooklyn and a young woman who is trapped in a parallel universe where she cannot leave the subway. It's adorable, it's quirky, it's funny, it's not perfect, but if you're looking for like queer representation, gay romance, this is a wonderful book to read. It's a bit of a slow burn, which is very popular in queer lit, about 100 pages. You have to get through about 100 pages before anything happens between the two main characters. Some people are really into that. I'm not as into that. But if you like a slow burn with a lot of like amusing narration in the middle, I recommend One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. Okay, the last book I'm going to recommend is Richard Rohr's Breathing Underwater. I joined a women's spirituality group a couple of months ago, and this is a text that we've been working through in that group. It is an examination of the 12 steps through a spiritual lens. I don't think that you need to be an addict or an alcoholic for the 12 steps to resonate in your life and to be a powerful healing tool. So I think it's something really wonderful to read if you're kind of interested in methods of healing and methods of reflection and meditation. And if you don't want to read about the 12 steps, I would recommend picking up really anything by Richard Rohr. He has quite a few books that are about sort of the spirituality of late life, sort of middle-aged, and I think he calls it the second half of life. So he writes a lot about what that time of life is like and how to continue your spiritual development during that time. So anything by Richard Rohr, but this is Breathing Underwater. It's a quick read and it's full of just really wonderful stuff. So those are my recommendations. Mandy, what do you have for us this morning?
Every book.
Yeah.
I didn't even bring a lot of the books I was thinking of. So for my recommendation, I'm mostly going to recommend that everyone find a way to talk about stories or what they're reading with someone else, either a book club or a partner or a friend or a group of friends or online. There's something about, Emma and I were talking about the importance for literacy and education and familiarity and comfort level with reading and books so we can have an educated society. But I think it goes even deeper than that humans learn how to be human from other people and through stories, even when a lot of times when I'm feeling particularly stressed out after watching the news or something, I actually like reading about things that doesn't have much humans in it, like some science or something. I was going to mention the Feynman lectures. I've been reading more like about quantum physics or other hard sciences where I won't have to consider human involvement. But when I'd read those, a lot of times, even in the most hard of hard sciences, the way the findings are described is through stories. And they link it into a narrative, like we've heard all about how the Big Bang happened, and there's a narrative about how galaxies formed. This is how humans learn, and we have connections with other people and strengthen connections with other people when we get to give our narrative about something we've read or why it's important to us or why we thought it was good or bad or funny. And it's not just books right now. Some of us that are older may not have fully absorbed some of the changes that are going on and how there are new ways for giving those human narratives and stories with games. There's a lot of games that have narratives and storytelling in them, and things like D&D and all the spawn of those kinds of games, where there's actually groups of people that are collectively making up a story. And these have a lot of strong connections and friendships are made with those games. Little tiny stories like you see in TikTok or on YouTube. It's a very human thing that there's just, whenever there's a technology, we had the technology writing. All of a sudden, we are telling our stories through writing. Before, one of the things I did bring was, and you'll want to get this out of the library if you ever do, it's too expensive to buy, as are most things. This is the Cave of Lascaux and the final photographs. Before it was closed up, they've made a reproduction cave because so many people were going through Lascaux, they were ruining it. So they made a reproduction cave and then closed the actual cave. But there are photographs taken. And when I look at those photographs, I see storytelling in the photographs of, hunts, or we don't know what all the stories might be, but you see handprints of people that lived tens of thousands of years ago. In our world now, every time there's another technology, people use it to tell stories to each other. So if there's anyone that has a book to share, but also if you have a YouTube channel you've been watching, a podcast, if there is a game that you found particularly meaningful to you or fun or helpful, those are all the same sort of things that get us connected to each other and build our sense of self and humanity.
So let's go to the congregation now. So if you have a book or a podcast or an audiobook or a game, something that's given you a lot of meaning and insight recently, we want to hear about it. We want to hear your recommendations. We're a bunch of intellectual, knowledge-hungry folks, and I know that we have a lot of resources, a wealth of resources to share with each other. So I invite you to raise your hand in the participants portal, and I will call on you. I'm seeing Nancy right away. Nancy, go ahead and share your recommendation for us. And Nate,
oh my gosh, I'm so excited to share this. I mean, a lot of people I know I've already shared it with, but this is my second favorite book. My first one I shared last summer, which was Long Walk to Freedom. But this is called Being Mortal. A lot of you know it already. And it's by Atul Gawande. And it's good for anyone that knows anyone that's aging. And that's pretty much everyone. And it gives a loving and realistic perspective on how an aging person feels and really wants in their life.
wonderful.
It goes into nursing homes and assisted living life and what people really want. It goes into hospice, and it's a fast read. It's really, really neat.
That's great. Thank you, Nancy. Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. Yeah, that's a great book. Everyone should read that book. Donna, you have a book recommendation. Donna, are you there?
Donna, unmute yourself.
This is one of two books I want to recommend. This is An Immense World by Ed Young, a marvelous writer. I think he's originally with the Washington Post. He's won the Pulitzer before. Anyway, it's new. It's how animal senses reveal the hidden realms around us. Things we can't see, things we can't smell, things we can't feel, touch, taste, or hear that they can. And we have a lot to learn from this. He's a wonderful writer, very conversational. Don't fret about the science part of it. It'll be great. Here's the other one. I recommend to keep your balance, to remember who you really are in your essential self. I've recommended this to lots of people I care about. It's The Mystic Vision, Daily Encounters with the Divine, compiled by Andrew Harvey and Anne Baring. It's one of those ones where they have a little teeny something on each day. I just whip anytime I want to. I go wherever I want to in it. I've read it so often. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Way ancient stuff. Connection with nature, connection with spirit. I cannot recommend it enough. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Donna, The Mystic Vision, and before that, a book about senses that animals have that we don't have. I think I heard an interview on NPR with that author. Thank you, Donna. Skylar, you have a book recommendation for us. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Skylar.
Yeah, so my book recommendation, something that I've read in 2022 is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. It's a fantasy novel in the LGBT. It's basically a reimagining of the fall of the Yuan dynasty and the start of the Ming dynasty. It's about a young woman who is just absolutely desperate to achieve her destiny and will stop at nothing and is a real force. I thought it was a great book. Yeah.
How many pages is that book?
I don't know. It's not an epic fantasy. It's just a regular fantasy. So
Skylar reads incredibly long books. If it's less than 800 pages, they're not interested. So just a disclaimer. They have talked to me about that book though, so I think it's a pretty good one. Virginia.
Okay, I guess I'll start. I guess I can, I don't know, recommend a few. One is, I guess, the fiction one I would recommend is a series called Murderbot Diaries, and it is a science fiction series. I think my mom's holding it up. She must have brought one. She's the one who recommended it to me, and I really like it, especially I don't usually go in for first person narratives, and I think this book helped me realize it's because I often have difficulty connecting to how they think. I don't know, this character is awesome, but I love that series. It's mostly novellas, so if you like shorter books, then it is actually they're pretty short and hilarious and awesome. I actually really love craft and art books, and I have a million, and I love looking at pictures and reading them. So this is one of my most recent ones that I've read through. It's called Imagine a Forest by Dinara Mirtalipova, and it's about folk art. She was raised in Uzbekistan, but it's really beautiful, and I've really enjoyed that. I just have so many art books, I could not go through very many. So that one is wonderful. And I guess a YouTube channel I love is Bernadette Banner. She does historical costuming, and it's really enjoyable to watch. And a video game is Animal Crossing. It actually has less of a narrative than than a lot of video games my mom was talking about. I have it for my Switch, and it's just a really lovely game. It's very happy, and I really like designing houses in it. So
Thank you, Virginia. Those are some great recommendations across a broad spectrum. All right, so I don't see any other hands on Zoom at the moment. If you're in the sanctuary and you want to recommend a book, pop on up and come join us in our living room. Come on, Lynn. Lynn told me yesterday that he reads a lot of books that other people don't read. So I wonder what we'll hear about. So if you talk right into the mic.
If you're a fly fisherman or have any connections to Montana, you probably have read the book or seen the movie A River Runs Through It by Norman Maclean. That's not the book I'm going to talk about. Norman Maclean's son, John, was also a reporter. He traveled around the world with important people during the Nixon administration. Anyway, he wrote a book called Home Waters on the Blackfoot River. He talks about a little bit about the movie. He talks about this book. He talks about the connections between all this in Western Montana. And I lived in Helena for a number of years, and I fly fish, and I've been very familiar with all that area. In fact, the map inside here includes the area where I did my doctoral thesis. He even has a picture in here of the guy from Bozeman who did the fly casting in the movie because Brad Pitt couldn't cast any better than Bob Robinson. And
Whoa,
Burn. Oh.
we're throwing down this morning. Lynn.
Bob, I'll have to explain a little bit. Bob is a great fisherman, but he one time saw me catching fish with a fly rod, and he went and bought a fly rod, and he was over next to me trying to fly fish, and he was going, and he didn't quite have the timing, and he gave up fly fishing and going back to catching real fish and bringing them home to eat. But anyway,
Some context for that epic burn.
This is an interesting book, and it is quite different from all the other things we've heard.
All right. Thank you, Lynn. All right, who's next? Come on, Karen.
Well, the next person comes up. I'll just mention there are several people in this congregation that have written books. And also one of the things I did this year was try to read every book of someone that had written one. Lynn was one of them, and so was Betsy. If there's more
Jeannie,
people, tell me.
Jeannie wrote a book.
Jeannie. CJ
Steffi under the name CJ Steffi. It's a book of vignettes called The Arrangements, and it's heartbreaking and brutal and brilliant.
Ooh.
And
see, those are the
so
things I
good.
want to know. I think it's
Read
really
it.
enjoyable to read books that people I know wrote.
That's fine. Wow. Okay. I hope I'm intelligible through my mask. Mandy was talking about different kinds of narratives, and of course, you might not be surprised to hear that a lot of the narratives I participate in come from folk songs, and one that's been in my mind a lot lately, there's a big ballad called Tam Lin, and basically the woman goes out to the wood and she meets this guy who might be a fairy, might be a human, not sure, but they have a tryst and she ends up pregnant. And then there's a woman named Frankie Armstrong who did an entire album based on first this ballad and then wrote a bunch of other songs about different aspects of the story. So there's a verse in the ballad once the protagonist, sometimes she's called Janet, sometimes she's Lady Margaret, anyway, she finds out she's pregnant, and one of her serving maids says, "I think I know a herb in the merry green wood that will twine the babe from thee." So she's suggesting a self-induced abortion. And Frankie Armstrong has written a song the story called The Song of the Second Serving Maid that goes into the story of how this second serving maid from her own experience knows about that herb. So that's been in my mind a lot.
What's the name of the album?
The name of the album is just Tamlin,
Tamlin.
and I believe it's out of print, unfortunately.
Okay.
I have a copy of it though. I have an LP.
Okay. If you
And
have
it's
a
by
record player,
Frankie
and
Armstrong is the artist.
Frankie Armstrong.
yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, as far as books, one that I've read recently that I thought was very good. It's by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I think it's the first fiction that he's written, and it's called The Water Dancer, and it takes place before the Civil War, and it's about, race relations and slavery and all that, but it's a bit magical realist, and it's a very good read and very thought-provoking. So,
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. The Water Dancer, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Thank you. for
Hi,
the recommendations. Oh, Virginia popping back in.
Sorry, I was just on Karen's, I looked up and the album's on YouTube. Frankie Armstrong is on YouTube, so you should be able to access it there if you're interested.
Awesome. Thank you for those quick fingers, Virginia. So if you want to hear that album that Karen recommended, it is available on YouTube. Awesome. Hi, Kat.
Hi.
Welcome to our living room.
Thanks. Y'all are seeing a lot of me today.
We
That's
are.
unusual.
It's a treat.
So I read a lot. I'm a person who reads a lot. And before 2020, I preferred novels that take place in like the normal world as we recognize it. And then in 2020, that got a little weird. So I started leaning toward like magical realism and all of these things that I had never really explored before, but that do not take place in any world that is remotely recognizable as ours. And one of the things that I've discovered that I really like is retellings of Greek myths. And there are a lot of authors lately who have been taking these Greek mythological stories that centered around men and instead centering the women in the stories. And so I just finished Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, who was a debut author. It's her first novel. Ariadne is the princess of Crete who helped Theseus defeat the Minotaur. So she becomes the center of the story, and it's kind of about her. Unfortunately, a main theme of the book ended up being how women often pay the price for the misdeeds of men and gods, which got a little real at the moment. But the book was really good. The narrative was really good, and I recommend it.
Awesome. Thank you, Kat. I just want to commend you for choosing just one, because Kat reads so much.
yeah.
Thank you. Good restraint. All right, who's next? Come on, Jess.
I'm just really quickly going to bounce off of the modern retellings of Greek myths. There's an extraordinary musical that's really popular right now called Hadestown, and it is my current obsession. And if you have not listened to it or watched the bootleg that's definitely not on YouTube, you should definitely check it out because it's really good.
Yes. Yeah. Is it Dar Williams or Anais Mitchell? Anais Mitchell. Yeah, Anais Mitchell wrote Hadestown before it became a Broadway show, and it's excellent. So Anais Mitchell, also a plug for her. Do you have a book recommendation? Come on up.
Ooh.
Speak into the microphone.
I'm going to preface this with, if you haven't read 1984, you need to go do that. I got my Orwell shirt on. I don't have a copy of the book, but one of my favorite books of all time, gets better every time you read it. Go read that. The second I have, this is
really close. Like scoot the chair up, so it's right there.
Right there.
I'm more worried about feedback because sometimes with my voice,
No, don't worry about it.
okay. In that case, sorry. I have, this is officially the fourth of the Witcher novels by Andrzej Sapkowski.
Yes.
They're very good. It can be a bit of a commitment if you read all of them, considering the fact that there's 5 main novels, but there's like 3 offshoots that take place in various times. It can be a little confusing where to start. Great piece of media. Plot is fairly complicated, but dialed down, it basically comes down to a sort of single dad trying to chase after his adopted daughter, who everyone keeps trying to steal away because she's got magical powers that she inherited. That's the really dialed back version. It deals with a lot of the themes of evil. He's very insistent evil is evil, but he's always being forced to choose between greater and lesser, which is a lot of what we're having to do in today's society. Emma pointed out with trigger warnings, I should probably go down the list because there's a lot. There's definitely sexual abuse, race and sex targeted violence, a lot of violence in general. If you can think of something objectionable, it's probably in here. So that's just a warning for any of it. But if you don't really feel like reading a whole series, there's a 2-season Netflix adaptation that is based off of this, and there's video games that you can play as well that have thousands of hours of narrative content that I can recommend. The third one's for Switch, and they have confirmed a fourth.
Awesome. Thanks, Walker. And thank you for that trigger warning. If you got a book to recommend and there's a trigger warning in the book, please offer that to us. That's a good thing to offer. All right. Anyone, come on up, Florlin, or do you want to just shout it at me?
Yes,
ma'am.
and so is Jess. I'm taking notes, and so not Jess, Jenna, and between the two of us, we'll have every book that's mentioned, and it will be in the Kat will put it in the next week's newsletter.
Weekly update. Yep.
Weekly update. Yes.
Okay. I didn't think I was having anything to share, but recently, Supreme Court decision has put back in my mind a book that I read called Freakonomics by Stephen Dubner and Stephen Levitt. One of them is a journalist. The other is an economist at the University of Chicago, which is known for a lot of Pulitzer Prize winning, Nobel Prize winning economists, which is considered the softest of the hard science or the hardest of the soft sciences. But it's basically using tools of economists to look at human behaviors. And so it's a very narrative type story. It's broken up into different chapters, which cover different things. For example, probability of street level drug dealers, how we kind of ignore hard science, like the effectiveness of child seats, because save the children. But the one that comes to mind is the chapter there on abortion and the law of unintended consequences has been on my mind recently. And so it's very easy reading, and it has spawned various other, I don't know if you call them sequels. There's also a very entertaining podcast. So it's just a great kind of way to look at problems in a different light, maybe do some eye-opening. So
yeah, great. I would
Freakonomics.
Freakonomics, and I would plug the podcast too. It is a good podcast. All right, we've got Ryan coming up. Bill, we'll get to you both. We knew we were going to run long this morning.
Hello. So I was kind of inspired about you're talking about people and how they interact with each other. And so one of the games that I've been playing recently has been called Unity Station. And it's a multiplayer online game. So trigger warning is everything because humans are very creative. So the premise of the game is you're on a space station and you're working together to keep it going. And there's kind of a command hierarchy. And so the interesting part about it is it's just like, how do you do your job and help others when the game is throwing problems at you? Like there may be you can think of it a little bit like Among Us. There are traitors that join on, maybe a blob attacks a station, maybe a meteorite strikes the station. So you may be a botanist, you may be minding your own business, and all of a sudden head of security ends up in your garden and asking you questions about a possible criminal activity. And all of a sudden you see your botanist friend who's helping you getting attacked by a police officer and handcuffed. And then you play as a police officer, and then you see the challenges there, and you see how that interacts with this hierarchy. And then you see the captain, and you see that the captain is human, and that there are mistakes. And so yeah, it's very interesting.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan, for a
Ryan.
video game recommendation. Come on, Bill, come recommend a book. Anyone else in the sanctuary who has something they want to recommend? All right, Joan. I don't see any other hands. So Joan, I think will wrap us up this morning. Sit down, talk right into the mic
Get your face right up to there.
so folks can hear you on Zoom.
Oh, we can.
So I got it now.
There we go.
Can you hear me good?
Yes.
Okay, I guess I got two books. One of them is mine. And it's called Vision of a New Past, Poems About America. And let's see, the other book I wanted to recommend, and I bet you many of you have already read it, but it certainly merits another reading in light of where we are in America right now. And that is Robert W. Persick's book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's very intellectual and not an easy read, but certainly a rewarding read. So if you have, and you can get it anywhere, secondhand stores, whatever. But those are the two books I would recommend.
All right, great. Thanks, Bill. Our resident college librarian, come on up. No pressure with that title.
So yeah, I can't live up to any of the where we're going. So I lately teach mostly children's and young adult literature. So my recs are going to be of a totally different nature, perhaps. But I assigned a book in my YA class 2 years ago that every time one of our alums writes me a thank you note at the conclusion of our program, they always thank me for making them read this book. So I thought I would recommend it. It is a book called Dread Nation by Justina Ireland. And it takes place after the Battle of Gettysburg. So it's a little bit of historical fiction, but with a very interesting twist, and that is that the dead have risen, and it is the job of Negroes, as they're called in the time period, to defend white folk from the undead. And so they are sent to battle school to protect everyone else. And so it's a kind of an interesting take on all kinds of things, but it examines racial relations, obviously the history of the Civil War, a lot of things that are reemerging, but then this mix with fighting zombies. So, if you like a little of the unreal, and I wish I could show you the cover because I don't have the physical book, but it is this gorgeous picture of this striking Black woman carrying a sickle with the American flag draped behind her. And it just brings all of the sort of tensions that get played out in the book to the cover. So that's my one that, and I can't describe it to you. It has a beautiful audiobook. If you like audiobooks, then I would say check out Dread Nation, because the woman who voices it, I can't remember her name, but it's just stunning. I am in the middle of writing a paper on on how suicide, which is a less joyful topic, but how it gets treated and works for youth, as unfortunately we see those numbers that used to be confined to the adult or maybe young adult population creeping down younger. So it was of interest to me to see how we're dealing with that in fiction in ways, talking about the way that we can heal through reading and help others heal. So if you want a whole list of middle grades books that deal responsibly with the loss, and also other areas of depression. The one I just finished last night is called Things You Can't Say by Jen Bishop. And it really reminds you, like through the eyes of a 12-year-old, what adult conflict looks like, and how the difficulties that we may have get perceived by our children and our friends. So anyway, a whole list of those, not as upbeat. And then I thought just for this group, but also a middle grades book, but a very quick read. So there's a really popular genre right now, novels in verse. So it's where fiction meets poetry. And I think there's some fantastic examples, but one of the one I've been using with my undergrads is a book by Jasmine Varga, Other Words for Home. And it's about, again, a 12-year-old, I think she's 12, well, she's just on the cusp of puberty because of course, and she is a Syrian immigrant to the United States. So it examines her experience of coming to the US, of dealing with the unrest at home, and how she comes to make the US understand it to be home, even though she has this other home too. But it's kind of a beautiful examination of the immigrant experience and also of culture, because as girls mature and get their period, they begin to veil and talks about that experience of coming of age and things that we sometimes in the US think of as oppressive are things that are actually sources of pride within some of the cultures that come here. And so it's just a really nice, you could probably read it in an hour, but Other Words for Home by Justine Varga.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joan.
Jasmine Varga, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Joan. Thank you for those recommendations. And thank you everybody who had a recommendation. We'll have a list on the weekly update. So get reading. And if you read something from that list that you really liked, tell us.